Sufi said, don't worry about doing life, you're being done. And I kind of totally agree with that. It also is in our 6 basic human needs. Those things that, remember, are driving you up and down, okay? So there's a lot of life when you go to sleep at night. You're probably in a better state. If a scientist came, you're probably in a better state of relaxation and everything asleep, almost unconscious, than you are awake. Right? So let's go into, we call this the life samsara. Okay, so and we draw it like this. Anyway, once you were born, okay. So you were born and, probably in a hospital and so on. And the one thing I've noticed is when you see a birth, you look at the look on the mother's faces and it's always the same. They've got the baby on the chair and you just see that total peace on their face. Anyway, I've noticed it, and you can look it up on YouTube too. Even your old pictures, if you have them of. And everything's great. And then it doesn't last long. You get in the car, you go home, and trouble begins. Okay? So what happens, we'll speed it up, but life is difficult. That's the first thing we've got to understand and accept, is that life is difficult. So you hit about 2 years old. And at 2 years old, psychology, everyone disagrees. Some say 1, 2, or 3, but we'll go with 2. At about 2 years old, they say you make one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make in your life. Listen to this one. Is the world a malevolent, dangerous, and violent place? Or is the world a safe, happy, and secure place? That's why they've done studies on twins, and they often see 2 people taking drastic different paths in life, okay? Because their perspective is psychologically put on a different path, right? So at about 2 years old, also, we'll say, you're 2, 3, 4 years old, and you'll be playing in the lounge. And you'll have a sibling there, your older sister or brother, whatever it is, and your older sister or brother spill milk. And the milk is spilled, and just then your mother comes around the corner and says, there's spilled milk here, and will accuse you of it. But now you're 3, 4 years old, right? So they'll accuse you of it, and you'll say, hey, but that wasn't me. Bang, often. No one wants to admit it, but they'll get a hiding. They'll shout at their kids, and they'll say things like, don't lie to me. I know you spilled the milk. Okay. So the thing with that example is that things are going to go pear-shaped. Things are going to go wrong. You're going to be accused of things you didn't do. You're going to be bullied. People are going to take your sandwiches, whatever it's going to be. So at 2 years old, we've already got a problem, right? Let's move a little bit on. Next, a little bit later on in life, you must understand that you are also going to be codependent. Of course, you're codependent on your parents for shelter, food, all the certainty. Shelter, food, all your physiological stuff. You cry and scream and you get your milk, okay? So you become codependent. Now, codependence means that everybody's first addiction, mental addiction of obsession, is codependence, okay? So you can't really get out of it, but there's a point to codependence, and we'll explain it just now. So moving on a little bit, life has a sense of humor. Let's say you're 12 and puberty starts. Now it's a very physiological thing, okay? And in fact, this whole side of life is very physical. It's very physiological. So at 12, now your body starts to change. You get hormones, all these kinds of things happen. People at school will say, you've got big ears. Or, you'll be too short, too tall. The girls will mock each other. Your breasts are too small. The boys, you're not strong enough. Gawky, you've got a long neck, whatever it's going to be. It's a difficult time. Also, of course, psychologically, you don't understand what's happening to you. Your body is changing, okay? So let's say you get through puberty, of course, and just remember that we are going this way. So you can liken this to a clock, okay? Life only moves one way. On purpose, life only moves one way. It doesn't ever go backwards. The evidence, have you ever gone backwards? No. We would if we could, but we can't. That's half the problem. It's always moving forward, and I want to tell you right now, I'll probably mention it 2 or 3 times, this process of life is not a chronological thing. This process of life is not a chronological thing. So I've seen tons of people in later life, okay, who don't get it at all. Very, very shallow, very self-obsessed. And Carl Jung would actually call this, he would put a split down the middle and he'd say, there's two halves of life, the first half of life and the second half of life. And to me, it's, if you've transformed or awakened or become conscious or even healed yourself, you've actually moved from the first half of life to the second half of life, as Carl Jung used to put it. So you're moving down, just remember it's not chronological, right? There's some 6-year-olds in the cancer ward who've got it. And the nurses detail it so beautifully. Life gets pretty serious. They understand why they're here, what the purpose and meaning of life are, much better than a 60, 70-year-old who doesn't get it. So down here, you reach 18, 19, 20, and things become very psychological. Okay? So you are reading books, you're starting university, hopefully, you are thinking a lot about the problems of life. You might be challenging the system. We need a new world system. We need this, we need that, the next thing. So it's a difficult time of life again, very psychological. People are teaching you and you have a lot of knowledge coming in, right? So that at 18, 19, 20 is difficult to gain because life is difficult, right? So now, as we are going through the first half of life, I don't believe in accidents, as I've told you a million times. So this is a process that is unfolding perfectly. This is a process that is unfolding on purpose and for a reason, which is meaning, right? It's unfolding and it's doing something with you, life, making you codependent, taking you through puberty, it's doing something with you and it's definitely moving you forward, okay? So before we think we've got it, like most people do, and we think we are managing life, life can get very emotional. And this, I find, this emotional quadrant here, emotional, this is the hardest part of life. If you think you can't understand how your brain works, just try and understand your feelings. Up one day, down the next. Depressed, stressed, anxious, okay? So much so that everybody experiences what I've started to call St. John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul. And I've drawn it like a dark sea because people have said to me when I'm depressed and I'm battling and I'm anxious, I'm battling to breathe. I feel like I'm just under the surface of the water and I can't come up. If you've ever felt like that, okay? So they battle. And to get across this ocean and go and find out who am I, the problem of who am I, is also happening to you. You have to look, you have to find, internal meaning for outer things. So you have to find a reason for life. If you don't, you're going to get depressed. So this dark night of the soul normally comes about because we're avoidant of how we really feel. We're avoidant of the suffering. We're avoidant of what we might find. When you ask, who am I? Are you a good person or a bad person? Are you kind or are you unkind? Now, of course, when you really dig into that, it can be a very scary and tumultuous place because you might find out that you're both. Addictions tend to start here. For example, avoidance tends to start here. You're trying to avoid, you think that these emotions are actually going to break you down. And instead of that breaking you down, they break you open. But we know that now, okay? And I think all that therapy is trying to say to people, you can navigate this dark night of the soul and you will come out a better person for it. So that's a strange thing. You could take this whole first half of life and think, I've been dealt a bad hand. I would rather die, kill myself. I don't want to go on with this process. But what we don't understand is that a lot of it, if you're in this quadrant of life, it's a mental process. And I don't think people are trying to kill the body as much as they're trying to kill the mind, the obsessive, compulsive thoughts. I just want those to go away, but they don't. Not in the first half of life. So in the first half of life, because we have codependence and we've got defense mechanisms and all these things, life becomes really, really difficult. And you build, in the first half of life, a container. So you build resilience. If you're that child and you're getting mocked and bullied at school, you're still building resilience. What for? You can't see a point for it at the time, but you're building resilience. And, I like to call it a container because without that container, you're not going to be able to hold the emotional and what comes later, the spiritual in life. Okay? You're not going to be able to contain the second half of life that Carl Jung speaks about. An existential crisis because you're lying to yourself, you're hiding things, you're making things subconscious, defense mechanisms, sure. You pick up personality problems in the first half of life. So another example I would have is just to say to you where it really starts an existential crisis is you develop a false front. This whole first half of life is about ego and you develop a false front. So even though you are feeling terrible inside, you're being bullied at school, you don't understand, everything's changing. People ask you how you are, you say, no, I'm fine. So you present this happy exterior, I'm fine. But everything has a consequence, which your brain can't do. We've already gone through that. Everything has a consequence. When you are lying to people and they're saying to you, good morning, and you don't believe them, firstly, you're saying, yeah, no, I'm fine. You're starting to mismanage your feelings. So the truth will set you free, the lies will have you trapped, okay? And that's how it happens. This becomes very, very confusing. You go to a family event, in fact, you almost expect it to say, hi, no, I'm fine. And as you grow up in life, there's very few people that you can talk to about your deepest feelings. So who do you talk to about it? Yeah, I'll just, let me pull my socks up. Let me pull myself towards myself and let me just get through this. This is what dads are teaching their kids to do. And of course, as we know, it's not working. So to navigate this is going to take a ton load of uncertainty and faith. And you almost have to become a mystic at the very least. So you've got to leave behind your very psychological and physical structure, which, your athlete stage, you've got to leave that all behind, the competition and all that stuff, and then move towards a more emotional, a deeper life, which is in the second half of life. And this is where I find people heal, okay? The strange paradoxical thing about this is that people in the second half of life, they've experienced more deaths, they've experienced more hardships, they might have experienced disease, people suffering. I often find that they are more open and softer and kinder. A lot of people actually love their grandparents more than their parents, who are always busy, always rushing, always angry. So you can see them down at the market. They talk to each other much easier, than the youngsters. So in a hurry. And they'll sit and talk to each other. They'll also be wearing comfortable clothes. They've forgotten about the physical a little bit. And they've moved into, it's high heels and tight pants and tight this. And it gets to, more practical, more comfortable. So going across here and becoming more spiritual means that you are now, through the hardships of life, being able to look at yourself inside. So that's what we said earlier. Spirituality is just being able to look within. Because when you get here, you're always looking at the outside. You don't want to go in here. And we'll ask you, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? So that you can reconnect. You might have been, your brain might have done you a bad one when you were younger. And you really did think you were fine when you weren't. Okay. So there's a good example of, there was a guy in New York City, I'll give you two examples, but a true story. And he was driving along, I think it was the San Francisco bridge and he decides he's going to commit suicide. True story. So he goes and he walks down the bridge. He's in a taxi. The taxi driver can see something's up. He tries to talk him down. Doesn't work. Anyway, he gets to the middle of the bridge, gets out the car, goes to the side and jumps off. The good thing for us is that a whole bunch of people came around and they witnessed what I'm about to tell you, which is quite an incredible story. So he jumps off and, plunges sort of 30, 40 meters or whatever it's going to be into this icy cold water. As he's done it, he says, I've made a mistake. And apparently there's a lot of research that says all suicides, real proper, not asking cries for help, that have tried to commit suicide and haven't succeeded, all say that they found that there was a point that they had crossed and they said, I shouldn't have done this, by the way. So that's quite interesting. So he had the same experience. He's off. He's in the middle of the water. He's now crushed his spine, so his legs are not working, and he's sinking. True's Bob. A seal, okay? A big, giant seal circles him. He says, I think he's an atheist at the time. He says, God, please help me. I've made a big mistake. Atheist. So obviously belief is not necessary here, which is also very important. A seal circles him and brings him to the surface of the water. We've got all these witnesses, and the story's on YouTube. I suggest you check it out. It's very, very good. So he comes to the top. What is he doing now? He's touring the world, going from place to place, lecturing on why life has purpose and meaning, how good life can actually be, and telling people that although there are dark nights of the soul, there is a corner to turn. And people don't understand that there's a corner to turn, which is part of the process. So that's where the effort and trusting the process of life, I'm going to get through this, comes in. Remember, there was also a 27 Club. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, all these guys as well. And they all killed themselves at 27, intentionally, subconsciously, it doesn't matter. Drug overdoses, suicide, whatever it's going to be. They did not know that there was a corner to turn. They thought this was it. So they thought they had arrived at a finish line. But their mind, psychologically, might have arrived at a finish line. But as we know, at 27, it's not the finish line normally. Normally, the finish line is way, way later on. So they were in a dark night of the soul. They had to trust the process and actually go through the process of opening up emotionally and then opening up spiritually. Being able to accept yourself as you really, really are, mind, body, and soul. Whatever soul is, you might not know. So it's going to be something that until you suffer enough or until you need it enough, you're not going to look at something like a spirit or a soul or a spiritual awakening. You're going to go, 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 but you'll be in this first half of life. Okay, and the second last thing is if you're trying to stay in the first half of life, life is going to start hitting you with a 2x4, and it's going to give you depression, the stress, the anxiety. You'll become addicted, whatever it is, because you are trying to resist this process, the samsara of life. And good luck, because life wins absolutely every time. You will break open, and then you will be helping other people understand, listen, buddy, you're 20, there's a corner to turn. Even our young guy in the cancer ward must understand that there's a corner to turn and there's a reason and meaning why he's there, and then he can feel more free. So too many people today are trying to avoid this thing happening, and secondly, they're trying to do it in all the work of life in the very last months, days, hours. You're trying to do it up here. And trust me, if you go and look at near-death experiences, go and look at what the nurses are teaching, they're saying that this process is basically enlightenment at gunpoint. Enlightenment at gunpoint. So it's a necessary suffering. So I like this description. It was St. Teresa of Avila, and she said, first the fall, then the recovery from the fall. First the fall, then the recovery from the fall. Both are the mercy of God. So she understood that both, and you move from this sort of very judgmental side, black people, fat people, this, they're either bad or good, or they're either this or that. You move to to a more it's more inclusive on the side. Okay, so we say, transcend your issues and then include them. Okay, so remember, before I tell you the last story, transcend your issues and then include them. So you say your life story, you build your life story, what's actually happened first, and then you include it in who you are. All the failures, all the egoic mess, the disasters that you caused yourself, the failed relationships, the businesses, the divorce, the anger, all of that caused by ego and pride, which was necessary for you to build a strong enough persona to get across to the other side, which is a more spiritual side. Okay, if you remember our pyramid of the 6 basic human needs, you would see certainty, uncertainty, significance, and the need for belonging are persona needs. And the top 2 needs really fit into this Carl Jung's idea of second half of life, which are growth and contribution. You're not going to be doing much growth and contribution when you don't get it. Life's very much about me. Here it's about we. Okay, then, and the last story is Anton LaVey. Has anyone heard of Anton LaVey? He wrote the Satanic Bible, and he was, off in California, causing havoc, got a Satanist church, whatever it's going to be. And he was dying a couple of years back, cancer. So Anton LaVey was made famous from the Eagles. They put him for marketing purposes in the tower, the Hotel California tower, and then leaked it to the press, all right? So that guy, just as much as our suicide guy, they got it, okay? He had on his deathbed what I call the flowering of consciousness, okay, from Eckhart Tolle. He got it. 6 seconds is probably all it took him. But the message is, so life is winning. Life will always win every time. So why wait? How much resistance, how much suffering, how long do you want to stay safe here? Rather than traverse the dark night of the soul and come through here. Remember, experiencing those deaths and things is a nice metaphor for what you're going through now. You come through these things, not harder, more closed off, more selfish. No ways. You come through here broken open, helping, loving, caring, being part of the solution and not the problem. So.